Welcome back to the reading of The Bark-Covered House by William Nolan. And this is early 19th century, and he's in Michigan now. We're going to start here with chapter 2, which is titled Disagreeable Music. It was night in the spring of 1834 when we arrived at Detroit, and we made our way to the United States Hotel, which stood near where the old post office was and where the Mariners' Church now stands on Woodbridge Street. The next morning I was up early and went to view the city. I wished to know if it was really a city, if it looked like Utica or Buffalo. I went up Jefferson Avenue and found some brick buildings, barber poles, wooden clocks or large watches, big hats and boots and a brass ball, etc. I returned to the hotel satisfied that Detroit was actually a city, for the things I had seen in my mind were sufficient to make it one. After I assured myself that there was a city so far from New York, I was quite contented and took my breakfast. And then, with our guns on our shoulders, Father and I started to see our brand new farm at Dearborn. First we went up Woodward Avenue to where the new City Hall now stands. It was then only a common, dotted by small wooden buildings. Thence we took the Chicago road, which brought us to Dearbornville. From there, the timber had been cut for a road 1 mile south. On this road, Father did his first road work in Michigan, and here afterwards I helped to move the logs out. The roadmaster, Mr. Smith, was not willing to allow full time for my work. However, I put in part-time. Little did I think that here, 1 mile from Dearbornville, Father would afterwards buy a farm, build a large brick house, and end his days in peace and plenty. From this point, 1 mile south of the little village, we were 1 mile from Father's chosen 80. But had to follow an Indian trail 2 miles, which led us to Mr. J. Pardee's. His place joined Father's on the west. We crossed Pardee's place, 80 rods, which brought us into ours. I dug up some earth, found it black and rich. Sure enough, no stones in the way. Late in the afternoon I started back to Mother to tell her that Father had engaged Mr. Thompson, who kept tavern in a log house 1/2 mile east of Dearbornville, and a team, and he would come after her in the morning. When I reached the Chicago road again, it seemed anything but inviting. I could just see a streak ahead, 4 or 5 miles, with trees standing thick and dark on either side. If ever a boy put in good time, I did then. However, it was evening when I reached Detroit, and I had traveled more than 26 miles. Mother was very glad to see me and listened with interest to her boy's first story of Michigan. I told her that Father was coming in the morning. As he had said, Mr. Joseph Pardee said we could stay with him while we were building, and I told her I was glad we came. How nice the land was, what a wonderful country it would be in a few years, and, with other comforting words, said that if we lived, I would take her back in a few years to visit her old home. The next morning Father and Mr. Thompson came, and we were soon all aboard the wagon. When we reached Mr. Pardee's, his family seemed very much pleased to see us. He said, "Now we have old Put here. We'll have company." Putnam County joined the county he came from, and he called Father Old Put because he came from Putnam County. Father immediately commenced to cutting logs for a house. In 1 week, he had them ready. The men came from Dearbornville to help him raise them. He then cut black ash trees and peeled off the bark to roof his house. And after having passed 2 weeks under Pardee's hospitable roof, we moved into a house of our own and had a farm of our own and owed no one. Father brought his axe from York State. It weighed 7 pounds, and he gave me a smaller one. He laid the trees right and left until we could see the sun from 10 o'clock in the morning till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, when it mostly disappeared back of Pardee's woods. Father found it necessary for him to have a team, so he went to Detroit and bought a yoke of oxen, also at the same time a cow. He paid $80 for the oxen and $25 for the cow. These cattle were driven in from Ohio. The cow proved to be a great help toward the support of the family for a number of years. The oxen were the first owned in the south part of the town of Dearborn. They helped to clear the logs from the piece Father had cut over, and we planted late corn and potatoes and garden stuffs. The corn grew very high but didn't ear well. The land was indeed very rich but shaded too much. The next thing was planting some seeds, and the next thing after planting some seeds was clearing a road through a black ash swale and flatlands on our west section line. Running north 1 mile, which led us out of the point mentioned 1 mile south of Dearbornville, we blazed a section line, trees over, and cleared out all the old logs and brush, and then felled trees lengthwise towards each other, sometimes two together, to walk on over the water. We called it our log way. We found the country was so very wet at times that it was impossible to go with oxen and sled, which were our only means of conveyance, summer or winter. When we could not go in this style, we were obliged to carry all that was necessary to have taken on our shoulders from Dearbornville. We had many annoyances, and mosquitoes were not the least. But they did us some good. We had no fences to keep our cattle, and the mosquitoes drove the oxen and the cow up to the smoke, which we kept near the house in order to keep those little pests away. The cattle soon learned, as well as we, that smoke was a very powerful repellent of those little warriors. Many times in walking those logs and going through the woods, there would be a perfect cloud of mosquitoes around me. Sometimes I would run to get away from them, and then stop and look behind me, and there would be a great flock for 2 rods back, besides those that were around me, all coming towards me as fast as their wings could bring them, and seemingly only satisfied when they got to me. But they were cannibals and wanted to eat me. All sang the same song in the same old tune. I was always glad when I got out of their company and into our own little clearing. Mr. Pardee was a little more brave. He said it was foolish to notice such small things as mosquitoes. I have seen them light on his face and run in their bills and probe until they reached the fountain of life, suck and gourmandize until they got a full supply, and then leisurely fly off with their veins and bodies full of the best and most benevolent blood to live a while, and to die from the effects of indulging too freely and taking too much of the life of another. Thus, at different times, I saw him let them fill themselves and go away without him seeming to notice them. Whether he always treated them well thus or not, I cannot say, but I do know they were the worst of pests. Myriads of them could be found anywhere in the woods that would eagerly light on man or beast and fill themselves till 4 times their common size, if they could get a chance. The woods were literally alive with them, and no one could tell the wearisome, sleepless hours they caused us at night. I have lain listening and waiting for them to light on my face or hands, and then trying to slap them by guess in the dark, sometimes killing them, and sometimes they would fly away, to come again in a few minutes. I could hear them as they came singing back. Frequently, when I awoke, I found them as wakeful as ever. They had been feasting while I slept, and I would find bunches and blotches on me wherever they had a chance to light, which caused a disagreeable burning and smarting sensation. Frequently, some of us would get up and make a smudge in the room to quiet them. We did it by making a little fire of small chips and dirt, or by burning some sugar on coals. But this would only keep them still for a short time. These vexatious, gory-minded, musical-winged, bold denizens of the shady forest were more eager to hold their carnivorous feasts at twilight or in the night than at any other time, and in cloudy weather they were very troublesome, as all the first settlers know. We had them many years until the country was cleared and the land ditched, and then, with the forest, they nearly disappeared. As I have said, our oxen were the first in our part of town. Mr. Pardee had no team. Father sold him half of our oxen, and he used them alternately, each one 2 weeks during the summer. For some reason, Mr. Pardee failed to pay the $40, and when a winter came, Father had to take the oxen back and winter them. The winter was very open and much pleasanter than any we had ever seen. The cattle live on what we call French bogs, which grew all through the woods on low ground and were green all winter. We found some wild animals and game very numerous. Sometimes the deer came where Father had cut trees down and browsed the tops. Occasionally in the morning, after a little snow, their tracks would be as thick as sheep tracks in the yard almost up to the house. The wolves also were very common. We could often hear them at night, first at one point, and then answering from another and another direction until the woods rang with their unearthly yells. One morning I saw a place by a log where a deer had lain, and noticed a large quantity of hair all around on the snow. And then I found tracks where 2 wolves came from the west, jumped over the log, and caught the deer in his bed. He got away, but he must have had bare spots on his back. One evening, Mr. Bruin called at our house, and stood erect at the north window. The children thought him one of us, as Father and Mother and I were away, and they ran out to meet us, but discovered instead a large black bear. When they ran out, Mr. Bruin, a little less dignified, dropped on all fours and walked leisurely off about 10 rods, then raised again, jumped over a brush fence, and disappeared in the woods. The next morning we looked for his tracks, and sure enough, there were the tracks of a large bear within 4 feet of the window. He had apparently stood and looked into the house. The first Indian who troubled us was one by the name of John Williams. He was a large and powerful man, and certainly very ugly. He used to pass our house and take our road to Dearbornville after firewater, get a little drunk, and on his way back stop at John Blair's. Mr. Blair had lived at the end of our new road. Here the Indian would tell what great things he had done. And one day, when he stopped, Mrs. Blair and her brother-in-law Asa were there. He took a seat, took his knife from his belt, stuck it in the floor, and then told Asa to pick it up and hand it to him. He repeated this action several times. Asa obeyed him every time. He, seeing that the white man was afraid, said, "I have taken off the scalps of 6 damned Yankees with this knife, and me take off 1 more." When Father heard this, with other things he had said, he thought that he was the intended victim. We were very much frightened. Whenever Father was out, Mother was uneasy until his return, and he feared that the Indian, who always carried his rifle, might lay in ambush and shoot him when he was at work. One day he came along as usual from Dearbornville and passed our house. Father saw him, came in, took his rifle down from the hooks, and told Mother he believed he would shoot first. Mother would not hear a word of it, and after living a year or 2 longer in mortal fear of him, he died a natural death. We learned afterward that Joseph Pardee was the man that he intended to kill. He said Pardee had cut a bee tree that belonged to the Indian. According to his previous calculations, on our arrival, Father bought in Mother's name 80 acres more, constituting the southwest corner of Section 32, Town 2, south of Range 10, east, bounded on the south by the south line of the town of Dearborn. A creek we called the North Branch of the River Ecorse ran through it, going east. It was nearly parallel with it, and 42 rods from the town line. When we entered it, he took a duplicate, and later his deed came. It was signed by Andrew Jackson, a man whom Father admired very much. Mother's deed came still later, signed by Martin Van Buren. This land was very flat, and I thought very beautiful. No wasteland on it, all clay bottom except about 2 acres. A sand ridge resembling the side of a sugar loaf. This was near the center of the place, and on it we finally built, as we found it very uncomfortable or very unpleasant living on clayey land in wet weather. This land was all heavily timbered, beech, hard maple, basswood, oak, hickory, and some whitewood on both sides of the creek. Farther back it was mostly ash and elm. That's the end of chapter 2. And we get to get that glimpse of what Michigan was like before any of the European settlers came into the area. So at that point, heavily forested. So much so that they had to spend all their time cutting down trees. And you know, it makes for great building materials. It talks about the log tavern that was close by, and of course they built a log structure probably almost exactly like the one I'm sitting in right now, including the bark roof. Such a great read. Thanks for coming along on this adventure into 1830s Michigan pioneer living. Hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching.